attention. I know exactly what you're thinking. What is wrong with me? Why in the world would I write such things? I get it, really I do. I have read that passage countless times at book signings, and every time I frighten myself. But before I answer that question, may I pose another question? Why did Bram Stoker write Dracula? I promise I'll answer both, but first let me take you back to 1977. I was 7 years old, and I was a Universal Monsters kid, through and through. Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr. I loved them all. I loved the silent Nosferatu film. I loved the Munsters, the Addams Family, Scooby-Doo was my all-time favorite cartoon, and I still watch it today. Just as much fun as ever. But when I was 7 years old, at Christmas, my dad gave me a 4-set illustrated classics box set. There were 4 of them. One was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. One was Herman Melville's Moby Dick. The third, Robert Louis Stevenson, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And of course, the fourth one was Dracula. I read Dracula over and over and over and over. But there's just something about it just stirred me. And I still have that comic book. I'm keeping it for my son, and it is literally falling apart. So, as I got older, I found an abridged version of Dracula, which was like for a middle schooler. I read it, and I was even more amazed. And as I got a little older, I got a copy of the unabridged. Read that over and over again in my 20s. And then in my 30s, I started reading various annotated versions. So you'll see with each progression of age, I got a little more and more scholarly about it, to the point where I was just an all-out Dracula, Bram Stoker scholar. As I got older, I began to read everything I could find my hands on about Bram Stoker, because I thought, who is this man? Why would he write such an incredible story? And there wasn't that many biographies out at the time about Bram Stoker. There's quite a few more today, but as I began reading about Bram Stoker, it dawned on me, Dracula, where did that come from? Where did he get it? Of course, Dracula is the second of 2 princes. There was Vlad Dracula II, who was Vlad III's, also known as Vlad the Impaler. That was his father. And so I began reading all I could about him. And through this period, I've got my hands on a copy of Bram's research notes, which are held at the Roosevelt Museum in Philadelphia. I got my hands on Bram Stoker's diary, started reading it, early drafts of Dracula. I got my hands on an Icelandic version of Dracula, which is very, very different from the one that we know. Also found a Turkish version, which was even more bizarre. So in all of this research, I just became more and more amazed. I'll tell you a few of the things that I learned that kind of stick out. So Bram did not walk until he was 7 years old. Nobody really understands why. Dacre Stoker, Bram Stoker's great-grand-nephew, who I'm friends with, he believes that it was the straw that they used to use to stuff pillows and mattresses. But during this period, Bram was pretty much confined to bed, and so his mother, Charlotte, would tell him Irish folk tales, ghost stories, and stories of fairies. She talked about the cholera epidemic, the potato famine, and these were really terrifying stories. people were being buried alive. And she told of recollections of people being in a coma and being buried. And it got to be so bad that they actually, someone had the genius thought of creating some kind of bell system that would sit up above the grave with a rope that would go down into the earth and through the casket. And if someone woke up, all alone, they would ring this bell and someone would be on guard in the graveyard to dig them up quickly. With the potato famine, her family actually and neighbors around drank the blood of cattle to survive. So all these terrifying stories made their way in Bram Stoker's works. Something else that I learned, Bram was not really known as an author during this time period. He was the manager of the Lyceum Theater. That was his primary occupation. He only wrote when he was on vacation, which hardly ever happened. But Bram wrote 12 novels, 2 novellas, and over 46 short stories. I found this fascinating, because most people just hear the name Dracula. Well, that's Bram Stoker. That's all. Not true. So, like I said, he was first and foremost known as actor Sir Henry Irving's right-hand man, who was the owner and lead actor of the Lyceum Theater. It's also important to note that Bram was raised Protestant, baptized at the Church of Ireland in Clontarf, where he was from. He was a man of God. He was kind, loving, very intelligent, hardworking, and loyal to a fault. He even passed the bar exam just so he had the intelligence to write about law in his novels, Dracula being one of them. But like his mother, Bram lived during a very turbulent time. Jack the Ripper was off murdering prostitutes in the Whitechapel district. There was a huge immigration surge, which brought along lots of fear, lots of crime, overcrowding, at a time when London society was threatened not only by poverty, poor sanitation issues. The Thames River was full of human waste. Untreated illnesses were rampant in just barbaric workhouses. But on the other hand, it was an age of science. Blood transfusions, even before there was blood typing. Bram's brother performed one of the first brain surgeries. Hypnotism was the rage. Of course, Darwinism, the invention of the typewriter, the telephone, spiritualism. So many people were dying. People wanted to talk to their dead. So that became a pretty big thing. The rise of the new woman. And anyone labeled different were sent to insane asylums. So Bram just took all this in. He was concerned of the solo man and the monster that society could create, especially when people believe that science trumped God. Of course, all of this found its way into his works. Bram's Dracula was an answer to all of this, and perhaps a response to the success of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, published 81 years earlier. The same concept that man cannot play God. His mother Charlotte actually sent him a letter after the publication of Dracula, congratulating him, saying it was better and even more frightening than Frankenstein. I thought it interesting that Bram labored 7 long years researching and writing this novel, which happens to have been the same amount of time he was bedridden as a child. The theme was of the unknown. In fact, the word vampire is not even mentioned until 2/3 of the way through the book. Dracula is about love. Yes, you heard that right. It's also about friendship. family, and faith in God will always conquer evil. In my humble opinion, I believe it to be the best Gothic psychological horror novel ever written. And no amount of movies pays it justice. So, just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, who has actually read Dracula? Not many. So, Dracula is not a horror novel. It's a suspense novel. It's a mystery novel, where the reader knows more than the main characters do. So, kind of like Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. It is not until about halfway through the novel that characters actually meet, sit down, and discuss their diaries, and begin to share and connect the dots. So, question one, why did Bram Stoker write Dracula? Pure and simple, really. He wanted to write his own Shakespearean tragedy, but with an uplifting ending. And yes, you heard that right, Dracula has an uplifting ending. Again, the movies, they all have it. So Dracula was also meant to become a play at the Lyceum Theater with his boss, actor Sir Henry Irving, donning Count Dracula's cape. However, upon reading it, Irving called it complete rubbish directly to Bram's face. He was crushed. And sadly, the reviews of Dracula in 1897 were not much better. And sadly, Bram died in 1912, almost blind and penniless, with his own death being overshadowed by the tragic sinking of the Titanic. Since Bram Stoker's death, the novel has become a legend. It's never been out of print. It has spawned hundreds of plays, movies, ballets, you name it. We have Grandpa Monster, we have The Counting Count from Sesame Street, and even Count Chocula's has his own cereal. So, flash forward to 2011, when I decided it was time to add my own name to the Dracula canon. So again, nobody knew much about Bram Stoker, mainly just to connect his name to Dracula, and that was really because of the success of Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 movie. So the direction of the vampire myth was going south, fast. Vampires were being sexualized. They were sympathetic, they glowed, they sparkled. People knew even less about the historical Dracula, whose surname, the fictional count, was derived from. So, the answer to my second question, why did I write Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire? I wanted to explore these concepts, but my idea for a Dracula prequel, which is really what it's become, it was born with rigid fan requirements. I had several, so let me go through them. I wanted to take the vampire myth back to its tappers, back to its origins and folklore. I wanted to expand upon themes in Dracula that were not fully explored in Bram Stoker's novel. He mentions the shamans where Dracula was schooled, but he kind of leaves it there. I think every fan has the question, well, how did Dracula become a vampire in the first place? I wanted my novel to be historical fiction. So all of the places that I write about in my novel are real places you can go and visit even still today. And Kevin and I have been there. I wanted the main characters to be real people. Bram Stoker, Florence Stoker, his wife, Noel Stoker, their son, Sir Henry Irving, Glad Dracula III, to name a few. I wanted my novel to foreshadow Bram Stoker's novel. I wanted to tell Bram Stoker's story. I also wanted to tell Glad Dracula III's story. I felt like it needed to be set in Victorian wanted to explain why Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. I wanted my novel to be where fact and fantasy collide, where history and literary license ensures that each chapter ends on a cliffhanger. And I felt like it needed to be written in the exact same style as Dracula was written, meaning Bram Stoker's own voice. The Victorian language, which is very different from my own. So to prepare for this incredible challenge, I immersed myself, just like Bram did, for 7 years. Just like Bram did. Intense research. I actually spent 7 years listening to the works of Bram Stoker driving to and from my job on I-75, 84 straight months. So 7 years and 3 drafts later, my novel was published in 2018. It's a tale of good conquering over evil. In my novel, just as Bram did in his masterpiece, several concepts are explored. That life will test your faith. Death and fear are a part of life. Never underestimate the power of prayer. So many people of numerous faiths stop by my table at book signings because they saw the poster, they saw the cover of my book, and they felt like I needed a little extra prayer based on the subject matter. So every time I would smile, explain that I am Christian, that Bram Stoker was Christian, and the Mormons especially were kind of taken aback, and they would pray with me and leave me leaflets, which I appreciated. And I actually told them that lots of prayer is happening in my home. For Bram was constantly shielded from evil and brought out of darkness and into the light repeatedly. And finally, that God will send you angels when you need them. They may not always be supernatural. They could be fellow Christians, devoted family members, close friends, or even complete strangers. So now, the 30-minute reading I did before this section. So the letter that I read at the beginning of the book is fictional. However, many of the items in it are true. Bram was not a member of the Golden Dawn, but he attended the meeting out of curiosity. It was actually Bram's good friend, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, the author of Sherlock Holmes, pressured Bram into going to a meeting, so Bram's signature was discovered on an attendance sheet. All the people I mentioned in the letter were indeed members that Bram knew very well. In fact, Pamela Coleman Smith, the occultist who led the seance, was also an artist who illustrated the pictures on tarot cards that are still used today. She actually traveled with Bram to the theater to North America, creating stage designs and costumes. She also illustrated Bram's last novel, The Lair of the White Worm. William Wilde, who was Oscar Wilde's father, brought back a mummy from one of his visits. And Bram named this mummy Queen Tara. And he actually wrote a book about her. The novel is The Jewel of the Seven Stars, published in 1903. So, though the horrific events of seance were invented by myself, I needed a way to introduce Bram to Vlad Dracula III. So, in conclusion, I hope Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire, will cause you to read Dracula if you have never read it before, or if you are already a fan, to read it again with new insight and appreciation. So thank you very much for coming and for your time and attention. I will stay behind and answer any questions you may have, and also there are copies of all 3 of my books that have been published at the table over here. If you're interested, I'll be more than happy to sign a copy for you. So thanks again. God bless.